Okay, we got some breaking news from the NFL world today. So, former Indianapolis Colts head coach, former Eagles offensive coordinator Frank Reich has now been hired by the Carolina Panthers.
Somewhere along those lines.
I,
Happy
I like those glasses.
Halloween Eve.
I like those glasses, dude. They're nice.
Tonight's gonna be a thriller.
Have I told you I worked at the World Series? It was my first year at the stadium. I went to Fanatics Fest, I went to Comic-Con, and I went to the World Series. It was my first year at the stadium, and the Yankees made it all the way to the World Series. Unfortunately, we lost 5 games to the Dodgers.
I said the Giants will be a perfect fit for John Harbaugh because you already established the quarterback situation. You already established the running back position. You already established the wide receiver position, and you have the top 5 pick in the draft.
Todd Bowles, at best, is a mediocre coach. He did the same situation with the Jets back in 2015, ultimately maliciously ruining a power-hungry Baker Mayfield and potentially Mike Evans.
But Indianapolis ultimately came back, got the go-ahead touchdown. Then, at the end of the game, when Brady got the ball less than a minute, Peyton had his head down the entire time because he knew Brady had enough time. But the interception happened. It's funny. All of a sudden, Peyton Manning hears the crowd roaring. He finally looks up and starts jumping up and down real. Good evening, folks. It is March 31st, 2026. This will be Agent Warrior's last episode for a few weeks, as after this week, he's got other duties going on.
Yep, ladies and gentlemen, there won't be the last episode, but it will be saying bye for now. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Everything on the Table, episode 8. I'm your co-host, Agent Warrior X, and today is March 31st, 2026. So, this Friday will be the opening day of the Yankees versus the Miami Marlins, which is why I'm not going to be at work on Tuesday because I got to work on that day. And then the following week, I got to go to work. So I will be on by like between the middle after the middle of January. I mean, April, middle of April. So, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to start the show off that Duke is not an elite team. Let me put it that way. Duke is not an elite team. Yes, you could argue and say some of the players came out of that college, but after this, UConn destroyed them in the Elite Eight. And now UConn is in the Final Four for the first time in 3 years. We have Michigan, Arizona, UConn, and of course, there's another college I think that went to the Final Four. But
Illinois.
Thank you, Illinois. So you have Illinois, UConn, Michigan, and Arizona. 4 colleges left. Who will come out on top of this year's March Madness? Now, this year, I predicted that Duke would win. A lot of people did. Ultimately, at the last moment, when UConn got that final touch in the butt and the game-winning three-point shot, everything changed. This was the UConn that everyone remembered. The UConn we remembered was sometimes an underdog because they were considered a top 2 team in the East.
Yeah, it goes. That's the crazy part about March Madness. And unlike the NBA playoffs, where it's best of 7 series, any underdog can win game 1, but the favorites can still win the series. In March Madness, it's single elimination. All you need is a team like Iowa winning, Florida losing 1 game, and all of a sudden everything changes. And then UConn and Duke, just when you thought it was going as predicted, the second half, everything did a complete 180. UConn came out an entirely different team in the second half, basically swapped playing abilities from the first half, and they ended up ultimately getting the win, and a great win at that. But now,
Cam Boozer, don't get me wrong, Cam Boozer did amazing. Cameron Boozer, Caden Boozer did all right. Isaiah Evans did okay. But to tell you the truth, why do you think Cam Boozer is one of the top 3 prospects of this year's draft class? Behind AJ Dibetsa and Derek Peterson. It's because Cameron Boozer is one of the Duke's finest. Because remember, Duke, North Carolina, Florida, UConn, and Kentucky. Those are the 4 colleges I named elite in terms of basketball. Now, for Cameron Boozer, I think the best way to describe Cam Boozer as a really good player. Now, for the best fits, this is according to DraftKings. DraftKings projected that Cameron Boozer would be on the Nets. Would you agree or disagree with that?
it ultimately depends on how the draft lottery turns out and who gets what pick. Is it a realistic possibility? It could be, but we still got to wait and see. We'll get a better idea in May once they do the draft lottery.
A lot of people say AJ Dibetsa is the top prospect because he's compared to Tracy McGrady or T-Mac. Because AJ Dibetsa has played his best basketball since VJ Enchkov, Cooper Flagg, and of course, Dylan Harper. We have seen those colleges play, but some of those college players could be bust. Like, we know for some players, like Abin Thompson is a great player, but he's not developing well. We know that VJ Edgecove, Tyrese Maxey, they're both great players, but in my opinion, they get hurt way too much at the worst time possible.
And that goes to show sometimes that the player with the higher ceiling on paper may not always pan out to be the best, because so far you had Ace Bailey was the projected favorite to go to the Sixers. But between him and VJ Edgecombe so far is having the better season. Now, this doesn't tell the whole full story for their careers. That will be written as the years go along. But one thing we've seen so far is that having a higher stock doesn't automatically make you the better player. We see the 96 draft class. The best player from that class was the late Kobe Bryant. AI had the most ceiling going into the draft and got the number 1 pick.
But ultimately, over time, he was my favorite player when he was on the Sixers. When I was like a little boy, like very young, I grew up watching basketball, basketball, and that's pretty much it. Baseball and basketball were my top 2 favorites because my dad used to take me to Knicks games. He used to take me to Nets games at the Continental Airlines Arena in Jersey. And of course, he used to take me to football games sometimes with the Jets and Giants. But ultimately, I'm going to put it this way and say that Iverson is my number 1 player as a kid, alongside Vince Carter and Jason Kidd as well. So I love the Sixers because of Iverson. Iverson was my favorite player overall. He was one of the best players that come out of Georgetown. Yes, he did. He made it a finals appearance at one point in 2001, and that step off from Ty Lue was crazy.
And Allen Iverson certainly earned the reputation as one of the best guards in NBA history. And that draft class, I'll just say, when you look at overall between a combination of former All-Stars, champions, Hall of Famers, or some combination of the 3, you had AI, Ray Allen, Steve Nash, Stephon Marbury, even Shareef Abdul-Rahim, who was a former All-Star. You had Jermaine O'Neal, one of the underrated centers, Kobe Bryant, Ben Wallace, arguably one of the greatest undrafted, if not the best undrafted player of all time. And there's probably 1 or 2 others that don't come to mind right off the top of my head. But the point is, you had a phenomenal draft class loaded with talented players that year.
Now, if you want to talk about best talent for draft class wise, 96 was one of them. Kobe, Iverson, Allen, Steve Nash, etc. 2003 was another one too. LeBron, Melo. You had LeBron, you had Carmelo, you had Tracy. Well, did Tracy McGrady was part of that draft class? I don't think so.
He was already in the league by that point. You had
Oh,
D
okay, so
Wade to the Heat.
yeah, Dwayne Wade to the Heat, James
Chris
to
Bosh.
Chris Bosh was another one.
And that was when the Eastern Conference started to get better because post Jordan till that point, it was a really weak conference outside of a small handful of teams. That draft class helped bring stability to the Eastern Conference and made it a stronger conference. Plus, a few weeks later, the signing of Agent Zero going from the Warriors to the Wizards helped make it stronger conference as the years went along. So that was an important draft class. Even you had other solid players like a Kyle Korver, who was a good role player throughout his career. He even had 1 year with the Hawks where he just really went off and had the year of his career.
I think Kyle Korver was actually a really solid player over time when he came to the Cavs, but sadly, he didn't win a ring. He was actually really good, but unfortunately, he didn't win a ring.
But yeah, that was another really good draft class. You also had the 08 draft class. You had Derrick Rose. You had Brook Lopez, I believe, was part of that class.
Yeah, Brook Lopez was a really good player, but ultimately he won a ring over time with the Bucks.
Yep, and then you also had Russell Westbrook was part of that class too.
This would be the one-if scenario. If Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, and James Harden never left to see the Supersonics or Thunder, they would still contend. They would still contend for the championship.
Right, but ultimately Harden wanted the bag, and he knew being the number 3 guy wasn't going to get it. Now, in the long term, it was great for James Harden's pocketbook, but it was his best chance to win a championship that he never capitalized off of, and that's something that still gets brought up to this day. But you've had
if you want to talk about the early 2000s, the 2000s NBA, the 2000s NBA was peak timeless. Not because of Iverson was the best player, not because of the Nets back-to-back finals happened. It's because the nostalgia, aura, and peak of the 2000s NBA era was the best. Yes, the Knicks may have been mediocre during the early 2000s with Allen Houston and other players, but ultimately the 2000s belonged to specifically the Western Conference overall.
Oh, yeah.
Specifically the Lakers, the Spurs, and of course, the Kings were actually a really good team. The Kings were actually a really good team.
Who else? Chris Webber, Mike Bibby. You also had Peja Stojakovic, whose son is actually playing in March Madness with Illinois as well. Andrej with a J, Stojakovic.
You know, if I'm being honest, the 2000s belong to the Western Conference. Besides the Lakers, Spurs, and the Kings and the Mavericks, etc. But ultimately, the Eastern Conference was stacked. The Eastern Conference was stacked because of this, and ultimately, some teams had some disappointing years. Others had great years, or had big 3 teams. Like the original big 3
class really helped the East out a lot.
And it wasn't just that. The Nets were the juggernauts. The Nets were the juggernauts during that time. They were still contenders. Even sure, you may have Richard Jefferson, Kerry Kittles, Jason Kidd, and of course Keith Van Horn, but it wasn't enough. You know what they did? They traded for Vince Carter in 2004. Still contended, but ultimately fell short to the Pistons or other teams.
Yep, and then all of a sudden, like those first couple of years in the East, it was mainly the Sixers, Pacers, Knicks show for a handful of years there. And then over time, you saw the Miami Heat became contenders. First, Dwayne Wade had that great rookie year, the Shaq trade. Now they joined the mix of potential teams. You had the Washington Wizards with Gilbert Arenas all of a sudden took off, became a star. They were consistently in the playoff mix. Once the Cavs were able to get over the hump once LeBron got to year 3, they became contenders. And then the Kevin Garnett trade to Boston. Now they were in the mix. you still had a bunch of teams. And then the rise of Dwight Howard, all of a sudden the Orlando Magic were now a threat in the East. And even the Raptors with Chris Bosh. And all of a sudden, now the East also had a good conference too. You still had the West out there was good too. You still had the Lakers, Spurs, Phoenix Suns, Steve Nash, Amari Stoudemire, the Dallas Mavericks, Dirk Nowitzki. You also had, who else was it that was thinking? This was obviously before the Warriors. You had the Nuggets with Carmelo, were consistently in the playoff mix.
The Nets over time was in the mix as well. After 2006, this is where the Nets was in the mix. But come the 2008 year, Judgment Day arrived. Deafening silence. The big three with Richard Jefferson, Jason Kidd, and Vince Carter was vaporized without a trace. The Nets from 2002 to 2007 to 08 season was no more. 5 of 12 players has been casted off to the wind. Wait, I forgot about one player who was also traded as well. Make that 6 players traded. Jason Kidd over time was actually a really good player, but he was originally drafted by the Mavericks. Over time, he won a championship with Mavericks, even though despite the fact that he wanted to win a championship with the Nets. Vince Carter, I understand he wanted to go with the Suns and then the Mavericks and then the Hawks over time. But he was actually really doing well for the Nets. So why cast him off to another team if he's already doing amazing? I understand the situation with Richard Jefferson over time, but to cast him off at a pure salary dump after you treated him badly, and that team specifically paying that amount of money to make him go away? Darkness descends on an official nuclear wasteland for the boys in Jersey. What a way to kill a franchise in one fell swoop. So now, before the disastrous years in Brooklyn, before they moved to Brooklyn, the disastrous years from 2008 to 2011 in their final year in Jersey, they decided to play terrible and then tanked. Since then, Brooklyn and New Jersey hasn't been really good or never been contending ever since. And now their plan, since the marketing issues, their plan is now move the Nets back to New York. But that New York borough is specifically Brooklyn. At one point, Jeezy did own the team, but it wasn't official. He did own the Barclays Center was built in 2012 or 2013. This is where things changed, because by the time when the Nets ultimately destroyed their contention and then became tank contenders and then became a super team at one point in the 2013 season, and then the what if 2021 season when KD, Kyrie, and Harden ultimately destroyed by a single toe. And by a toe, I'm talking about his shoe size, Kevin Durant's shoe size. If you even got to that. They threw up their hands and called truce and said, you know what? We're staying put. We're not going to tank for the top pick and destroy our tank. Speaking of the Nets, we're losing to the Hornets. Great.
Yeah. And if you want to talk about failed super teams, there's been something I've been thinking, because here's an when it comes to the failed super teams, the common mentions are the Lakers with Dwight, Kobe, Steve Nash, the Lakers with Russ, AD, LeBron. Other failed super teams that commonly get mentioned include the Nets super team the first time around with KG and Pierce on the wrong stages of their career. But here's one that a lot of people forgot about. Now, on paper, this seemed like a great roster. It's not the Sixers' big three they have currently, or that never was. It's actually the 08-09 Phoenix Suns. Once you hear their roster, you'll realize at first it'll seem like one of the best rosters ever. Amari Stoudemire, Shaq, Steve Nash, Grant Hill, Jared Dudley, Goran Dragic, Matt Barnes. That's really seemed like a great roster on paper, but in reality, guys like Grant Hill, Shaq were on the wrong ends of their career. Oh yeah, you also had a young Robin Lopez too, and also what's his face? Amari was injured too, so that team finished 9th and didn't even make the playoffs. That was an example of having the right roster with most of them in the wrong stages of their career.
Because the phrase "right stage but at the wrong career" was either they're past their primes or they're injury prone. Now what does Brooklyn have now, Nikki? A play-in tournament or tanking season over the past month after that disastrous year for Cam Thomas, and then he was injury prone. He was great for last year, and then he got hurt again. He was out for the year, and I said, get Cam Thomas some help. He was in his final year in his contract. What do they do this year? You guessed it. They waved them off. There are only 3 players left on that roster. There are only 3 players left on that roster, on that 2021, 22, 23 playoff team. It's been less than 2 years. Noah Clowney might be sent back to the G League due to player development. Noah Clowney might be sent down to the G League due to player developmental purposes. Daymond Sharp could potentially be injury prone. What about Nick Claxton? He wants to stay here. We know for a fact that he's a homegrown player, but ultimately for the Nets, they have officially now went from a super team to a mediocre team to a tanking team. Last year we tanked, but ultimately destroyed it at the worst time. And we should have never won that game against the Kings, nor you guys last year.
But speaking of the Kings, I've been thinking about something. The collapse of the Orlando Magic. What this reminds me of where the Sacramento Kings were just a few short years ago. They made the playoffs in 2023, their first time in nearly 2 decades. They lost the Warriors in the open round, but making the playoffs, the future looked bright. You thought they had a core that could at least contend. And now they're at the bottom of their conference. The Orlando Magic have had a couple decent years making the playoffs. They seem to have a solid team on paper. Guys like Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner seem like a team that could at least contend to get into the playoffs. But with all the injuries and just chemistry woes, this team's fallen back, and it's actually moved the Sixers up. Not necessarily because the Sixers are great, but just because the Magic have been so terrible recent weeks. I'm starting to see those trends, that pattern similar to what the Kings were just a few years ago, where they made the playoffs and then did a free fall. And it looks like the Orlando Magic are in that early stage of becoming the Eastern Conference Sacramento Kings.
This is where I agree to disagree. I agree with the Kings becoming a contender, but ultimately it was short term. The disagree part is that the Sixers could jump up over time. Because yes, you could say the team is still hurt with Embiid and Maxey potentially still out, or anything, or Paul George still out. They should have never gave that contract, to be honest with you. And the disagree part with is Paulo Banchero is on his final year of his contract, potentially.
But what a disastrous and embarrassing fall off, because I was on 3-point blitz just a few weeks ago. As of March, around like early mid-March, the Sacramento Kings were in like the middle pack of the Eastern Conference playoff mix. As of today, they're the 8th seed, having lost 7 of their last 10. That's an embarrassing fall off.
What's also a crazy fall off is that Brooklyn, at one point, when Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving was both traded, they were still in playoff contention as a 6th seed. But then the very next year, and yes, we got swept by you guys, so don't ask why. Then the very next year, we just tanked. We just tanked the very next year. And then ultimately, the very next year, we blew up our tank. and that this year we're on the top worst teams of the East. The top three worst teams of the East. Oh, sorry, or should I say bottom three worst teams. But where did the front office, such as Sean Markson and Joe Tsai, gave you after all that radiation sickness? A bucket of basketballs. This year was different, all right. It started with promise. It ends with death. The Knicks will piss on their graves like they always do.
And real quick, I'm gonna look at some of the live up score, give a quick live score update. So right now we got Magic are
We got the
actually up
Knicks
70-56 over the Suns, which
halftime.
is a surprise.
and we got the Knicks and the Rockets. Houston Rockets versus New York Knicks, which I'm gonna try to tune into that game before the Yankees play against the Mariners. I'm gonna try to tune into that game. And so far, they're leading by up 10 plus. When I heard Kevin Durant was traded, this happened at Fanatics Fest. It blew up the sports world saying that Kevin Durant was traded to the Rockets. And it happened at Fanatics Fest. Literally, it did.
Well, that whole day was a crazy day. But as far as baseball goes, Phillies, it's time to move on. Your manager they've lost the team. And yesterday, they had nothing going right against the Washington Nationals, losing 13-2. And the worst part is now you still got to play him again today and then again tomorrow. So there's that mental jinx, although they are up 3-1 at the top of the seventh. So for now, it's a decent bounce back, but it's not looking like the same Phillies team when Rob Thompson took over and they made the run to the World Series.
Which Bryce Harper, Alec Baum, right? Bryce Harper, Alec Baum, Kyle Schwarber. You know what's embarrassing? What's embarrassing last night from the Nationals and Phillies is that they got blown out by one of the weakest teams in the East. Not just the NL East, but one of the weakest teams in the NL East, who were dead last year. Dead last. Behind the Braves. What's crazy about it is that the pitchers gave up too many runs. Now, speaking of pitchers, let's talk about the Yankees offense. So far, the offense looked like it was okay against the Mariners last night. Yes, the Yankees pitching has been lights out from start to finish. From the day that we beat the Giants on Netflix to a clean sweep, now against them again. Last night was really. I mentioned this in my post game. I said it was a pitching duel between Luis Castillo and Ryan Weathers, who we picked up for the Marlins. And Ryan Weathers, I got to get props to. But you know what they say, Nikki? Defense wins championships, right? Or in other words, pitching wins championships. That's what people say, right? Look, I'm going to compare that defense for the Yankees so far to the Seahawks and the Texans defense.
Man, now that theory, it's interesting that ties into the myth that defense wins championships because for the Seattle Seahawks, it played a key role in helping them. For the Houston Texans, you would think on paper it'd be a team that have a shot, but offense was ultimately their undoing. So the way I see
that's been their Achilles heel over time when it comes to the Texans. The Texans offense was great in the season, but in the playoffs, this is where things come to fall from grace. Because over time, when it comes to like teams such as the Seahawks, Jets, Giants, Cowboys at one point was an elite defensive team at one point. The Eagles was an elite defensive team at one point. Sometimes that elite defense team doesn't win championships. They test that theory, but sometimes it doesn't work. Now, for pitching wins championships, this is a completely different story. The defense overall, so far, according to the Rio app, the Yankees have allowed 2 errors, and they're number one in batting average against so far. Number one in on-base percentage against, and they're number one in runs allowed. They allowed less runs than last year. Last year was a disastrous because they allowed too many runs and too many errors. That has been their Achilles heel. And the coup de grace, injuries. Injuries really killed them the most. Rodon won't be back until late April. Cole won't be back until May. And then Anthony Volpe won't be back until May either. So far, I really like this team so far. Not because of Judge struggling, but the ABS system. Oh boy, when the ABS system came, the Yankees were lights out in terms of getting the right calls.
And when you said playoffs, about playoff failures of the Texans, I started thinking about two things, because for playoffs, we're getting closer to two sports playoffs, NBA and NHL. The NBA, I look at the Cleveland Cavaliers. They got two guys you want during the regular season, and Donovan Mitchell and James Harden, but do complete 180s, and their play basically demotes itself with poor playoff performances. That got me thinking, who are some of the best regular seasons players, but worst playoff players? I started thinking of a list. I'll go Karl Malone and John Stockton for the Utah Jazz. And I know they lost in the finals to the Bulls twice, but how many other years did they get to the playoffs and run into Gary Payton, Sean Kemp, Hakeem, Clyde Drexler, or even Dirk or Robinson Duncan, the new Twin Towers? So they had a ton of playoff shortcomings. They only came across the Bulls twice. David Robinson pre-Tim Duncan. His style of play basically demoted from admiral to private, which is a lower military rank, before Tim Duncan came there. You also had Embiid, who has had numerous chances come playoff time, but always resulted in quick exits. James Harden as well, for numerous teams.
Same could be said about the MLB playoffs in October. Come October, this is where things get real serious. You have some key players doing X factors. For example, for X factors, I'm gonna name one of your Philly players, Kyle Schwarber. Kyle Schwarber played a huge X factor against the Dodgers last year, but ultimately the bullpen ruined it all in Game 4 against the Dodgers. Kyle Schwarber, Bryce Harper, Orion Kerkering. That game against the Dodgers was crazy. Sure, you may have lost to us on Thursday Night Football, but worst case scenario, that was a bad night for Philly. The Flyers lost to the defending champ Panthers. You guys losing to us, and then the Phillies losing to the Dodgers, which is crazy.
And as far as the Flyers go, hey, they might make the playoffs this year, which would be a rare feat. And because sadly, since that late 2000s, early 2010s run where they tried and fell short, they've only been there a handful of times since. And this might be
worst
one
case
of those
scenario
years.
that the Flyers, the last time they made it to the finals, last time the Flyers made it to the finals was in 2000, was like 2009 or 2011. But you couldn't beat the Blackhawks. I'm gonna tell you the truth. The Blackhawks were too strong for you, not because Patrick Kane was the best player, but specifically the defense was amazing.
Now, if you want to talk about teams that have some of the worst playoff luck in sports, period, you could name the Philadelphia Flyers, Minnesota Vikings in the NFL is another. You've had in the NBA, the Nets, when they do get there, as well as the Jazz, because they've had so many chances over the years. Even post Stockton Malone, they've had their chances. They just couldn't close the deal. The Phoenix
Even with
Suns,
Donovan Mitchell had multiple chances, did he not? He had multiple chances with the Jazz before he was traded to the Cavaliers. Before he was traded to the Cavaliers, the Jazz had multiple chances. Now for the Nets, you are right about one thing about Brooklyn. It wasn't good enough against the Bulls in the early 90s. That I will say. It was like, yeah, we're here, but we're not supposed to be here. That's one of those situations, say we're not supposed to be here, but we are here, right? I'm gonna give you examples that teams that should have been in the playoffs that shouldn't even be in the playoffs. Carolina Panthers. Carolina Panthers is a prime example. And I'll tell you why the Carolina Panthers. Bryce Young and the entire defense grinded out. They grinded out this year, and we mentioned this on NFL Pick'ems. I said the division winner should be the Panthers after that massive comeback they did.
And if you want to talk about other teams that are snake bitten come playoff time in sports, you got the Buffalo Bills throughout the years. All the times they've come short, either playoffs or Super Bowl, or a team out west in the AFC, the San Diego, now Los Angeles Chargers. They've had plenty of good
They're
teams.
officially a playoff snake bitten playoff team at this point, because not because of that 94 season when they had that massive run, not because of that 06-07 season when Marty Schottenheimer retired, or worst case scenario, that blown lead against the Jaguars, or that worst performance from Justin Herbert.
And this even goes back to the Dan Fouts era too, with Dan Fouts, Kellen Winslow Sr. and company had their chances and they just fell short. But there's always those teams in all sports that just, no matter who their coach is, no matter who their new star players are, no matter how much turnover they have at a certain position, it always seems like they're snake bitten come playoff time.
Oh, yeah. Did I also mention another snake bitten team is the Lakers? The Lakers are also another snake bitten team, too, sometimes. Because sometimes when they have a super team, like, for example, last year, when they had Luka Doncic and LeBron James, right? When they had Luka and LeBron, guess how that turned out? They were first round exits against the Minnesota Timberwolves, ultimately coming short against the eventual champion Thunder.
Now, most people don't consider them, although to be fair, recent years, yes, historically, no. They're one of the most decorated teams in North American sports, along with the New York Yankees, Montreal Canadiens, New England Patriots, San Francisco 49ers.
Dallas Cowboys, you could say that. But most recently, the Yankees, speaking of the Yankees, they, ever since that World Series run in 2024, they have been doing great, but ultimately hitting injuries at the worst time. Garrett Cole was supposed to be back in 2024, but ultimately he's out for the season because of that Tommy John surgery. And then the very next year, he's returning in May. The team overall, on paper, looks great. With Cody Bellinger now back on the Yankees. When Cody Bellinger came on the Yankees, he was amazing. He was amazing on that team. Sure, he may have been a reliable player on outfield, but ultimately, they fell short to an eventual AL American League champion, Blue Jays, who had a massive resurgence ever since paying Vladimir Guerrero Jr.
But yeah, that's just the way it goes now. With March, we'll see. We still got March Madness though too. I'll say this for predictions at this point, I'm gonna have to go with UConn because Coach Hurley's been in this situation before, and now he's gotten to the Final Four. The experience factor from a coaching standpoint comes in, and that can be UConn's greatest addition. First, you got Illinois, which are the favorites, and then you either got Arizona or Michigan, which is actually the most exciting of the Final Four games and the most intriguing in terms of how the two teams match up.
So I'm going to say for the Final Four prediction, for the national championship this year, a new champion will be crowned. It's going to be between UConn and Arizona.
Get that? Well, that would be a good matchup too. But either way, I think UConn versus either Arizona or Michigan would be a big matchup. Now, I'll say this. The media, they would want UConn versus Michigan because of big power school. They feel like that'd be better for the ratings. And we know all sports media usually likes those type of matchups. Like Dave Love, Lakers, Celtics in the NBA Finals. Boston, Los Angeles, two big market cities, good for ratings.
Brooklyn, the Knicks, right? Brooklyn, the Knicks. Well, technically, Brooklyn is another big market team too, because this year they're tanking. And speaking of the Nets, they should have never won that game against the Kings, because you had the opportunity to get the number one pick to have the number one pick odds So we're not only tanking for the top player, but you're also tanking for the top odds. So over time, I could see us losing out for the rest of the season.
And also something else they would love too in the NFL, when the NFC East, when the weakest link is a team with 8 wins, that's great for them because that's Philly, New York, Dallas, Washington in terms of big market cities. When that division's competitive, that can help the ratings to a certain extent. And that's something that they love in all sports. Or when it's NFC East versus NFC East in the playoffs, Eagles versus Giants. But just something about New York and Philly, especially for East Coast sports medias, they love those New York versus Philly playoff games or series. They love it.
I'm not a Mets fan, but I'm going to tell you this. New York and Philadelphia is the most common sports rivalries of all time, specifically for the Mets and Phillies. But all-time wise, it's New York and Boston. New York and Boston is the most common all time. Like the Phillies, Phillies, Mets, Yankees, Red Sox, Giants, Eagles, Patriots, Jets. Now, I could say the Giants and Patriots as well, but I'm going to put that in there because we did beat the Patriots 2 times in the Super Bowl. Now, for the Eagles and the Giants is the most common. They're division rivals because the fact that they love to beat the Yankees most of the time. They beat the Giants most of the time ever since they took Saquon. But over time, long term, it's looking like it's slowly declining. Oh, yeah, speaking of the Giants, did you hear about Odell Beckham Jr.?
What's up with him?
I'm hearing rumors that he might reunite with the Giants again. Now, don't get me wrong. Just in case Darius Slayton is bad again, or sometimes worst case scenarios, you have Odell Beckham Jr. And speaking of Isaiah Likely, he changed his number. And yes, Grant Gano was finally cut. Thank God. He was reliable, but at some point when you're injury prone, things change.
Yeah, it doesn't. Ultimately, once you're injury prone, it's not going to make much of a difference. That's why Rod Strickland was a journeyman in basketball who bounced from team to team because of his lack of availability. But as far as the OBJ thing, all I can say is I've learned from dealing with the Eagles fans over the years and rumors, don't believe the hype because a lot of rumors don't turn out to be true. I can look at, through my time on YouTube, there was a point, this was before Jalen Hurts had that great 2022 season. They wanted Deshaun Watson 1 minute. They wanted Aaron Rodgers for a minute. Recently, they wanted Max Crosby before the failed physical. They wanted Myles Garrett a few years ago. Now they want him again. All that combined escalated to just a bunch of hype with no payoff in terms of those trades or acquisitions.
And speaking of baseball, the Yankees so far this season have been 10 for 11 in ABS challenges this season, 91% in the MLB, and second behind the Arizona Diamondbacks. Now, for those who are, and I know, not going to mention no names, but I know a specific content creator who'd say the ball's bigger than the icon. To tell you the truth, it depends on your height. You're right about that. But then when the ABS challenge came in, everything changed. There's no more rigging calls. Nothing. Aaron Judge, this is a prime example. Aaron Judge, throughout the past couple years, has a strikeout rate of 23% of the time at plate appearances.
Which is awesome for the first week of the season, but with baseball, it's the longest schedule in the North American sports. So,
and it's not just one of the most longest. But this is what people are debating about: should the ABS system be part of it or not? And I would say I want to be part of it, but for a few occasional reasons. The umpires have been making bad calls last season from start to finish. The controversial calls got multiple managers ejected. Aaron Boone is one prime example. And I know why. He gets ejected because of those controversial calls and, of course, bad calling. Oh, and we're beating the Devils this time around against for the Rangers. What's the point anyway? You're basically just tanking for the top pick. I just want to get that out of the way real quick. But here is the con side. People don't like it because they want to see the balls bigger than the icon. I understand that. Some teams don't like it because they were reckless on some calls. Boston is one prime example. And I'll tell you why the Red Sox is a prime example. They are one of those teams who wastes challenges recklessly and sometimes doesn't get the right calls ever since. So I'm going to put it this way and say that the Red Sox sometimes are reckless in terms of challenges. That's because Trevor Story got ejected. You see what happened with Trevor Story and Alex Cora? That was by far one of the most craziest things I've ever seen. But there's a thing. You can't argue with robots. And you know what they say nowadays? Nikki, you remember the phrase, football's a game of inches?
Yep.
Instead of saying football's a game of inches, baseball's a game of inches. Look how that turned out in Game 7 of the World Series. The Blue Jays were this close to win the World Series, but ultimately Will Smith has his foot on the home plate, and IKF died at the worst time. That's why I say baseball's a game of inches. The ABS challenge is another prime example. Once the umpires call a strike, they do this. They tap their helmet to challenge it to see if it's a strike or not, and then ultimately if it's inside the strike zone by a millimeter or centimeter, that's still a strike. If it's outside the strike zone by like a centimeter or a millimeter, that's a ball. That's what I can't say. Ball don't lie. Baseball's a game of inches. The moral is don't waste your challenges unless it's needed.
Yep, and the same can be said for all sports.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, duty calls for this Friday. And I know Super Mario Galaxy movie is out tomorrow, so I can't wait to see that the next couple of weeks. And to tell you the truth, I will not be on this show for the next 2 weeks, but I will be back when I'm on vacation. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, goodbye, my friends. This is Agent Warrior X. Have a good night.
All right, and for Nikki Stees, folks, thanks for tuning in. Best of luck over these next coming weeks, and that leaves me open to do everything on the table, maybe do some tier rankers.
Oh, there is one more thing I want to mention. Next month or tomorrow is Autism Awareness Month. And to tell you the truth, I have autism. And autism isn't just a disability where people think autism is just a disability. No, it's not just a disorder. Autism is how the brain functions. We treat people with kindness, love, and respect. Sometimes I like to stutter a lot, and sometimes I just stop for a moment. But overall, Autism Awareness Month is a special month for all those who have autism. And I want to say happy World Autism Awareness Month. Until then, goodbye, my friends. Have a good night.
And I'll say this for the month of April. It's the most misunderstood thing out there. A lot of people out there, if they really want to understand what autism is, they should go on WebMD or just Google it. There's plenty of sources out there where you can research and gather more information to learn, because there is a lot of misconceptions out there from people's, and there's too much information out there for people to be that misinformed. Do your research, folks.
Until then, happy Autism Awareness Month. Have a great night, everybody.
Peace, and we'll catch you later.